Okay, friends, so now we've seen how the minimum wage federally has changed over the past 80 years or so. So let's now look back to the original Jobs with Justice claim. And let's make sure we know too, this meme is definitely something important. It's claiming that minimum wage currently, as of 2015, which as it turns out is the same minimum wage as I'm sitting here typing this, it's insufficient. And here's why. We know that minimum wage is higher now than it was in 1985. We just looked up and we saw that it was $7.25 currently. But back in 1985, it was only $3.35. So it's just about twice as high as it was then. But that's not what the meme is saying. It's saying it's worth less. Not that it is higher, but that it's worth less. And hopefully, as you've thought about this, I'm going to regret saying this, but there's a simple explanation as to how something can actually be higher in value, but worth less. And that simple, quote unquote, simple explanation is called inflation. So all you got to do is think back in your lives. And for an old guy like me, this is easy. When I looked back through those minimum wage tables, and I was kind of going through them, like I was born in 1973, and here I graduated from high school, and I think about the price of things, they were cheaper. For example, I'm a drummer. Back in the late 80s, or actually mid to late 80s, I would go to my local drum store and buy drumsticks. And those drumsticks would be about $3 a pair. Well, now, I mean, you can't find drumsticks for $3 a pair. If you're buying drumsticks $3 a pair now, either you got a sweet deal with somebody, or you're buying crappy sticks that are going to break almost immediately. You're paying $7, $8, $9 a pair for drumsticks. So things were cheaper, quote unquote, back in the day. Why? So the answer to why, and I'm going to escape out of here again. I did a little bit of Googling to save us some time. I just did some Google. The idea is inflation, in particular economic inflation. So the first thing I did was I just Googled what is economic inflation. And I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too far, because some of you are going to take economics classes where you'll actually look at these things in context of what causes it and whatnot. But I just want to look at basically what is economic inflation, and then we'll dive quickly into what causes it and then back out, because I want to focus only on the math of inflation. So this Investopedia had a pretty fun little inflation is a quantitative, meaning numerical, measure of the rate at which the average price level of a basket of selected goods and services increases over some period of time, often expressed as a percentage. I'm going to come back to this idea of basket of goods later, because it's not completely relevant right now. We're not looking at an entire basket of goods. We're looking at just the minimum wage. But the idea of a basket of goods is important. So, often expressed as a percentage, inflation indicates a decrease in the purchasing power of a nation's currency. So they're often expressed as a percentage. We're going to focus on that because that's how it ties to exponential growth. But the idea of a decrease in the nation's currency is important. So for example, the reason they're bringing that up is in 1985, minimum wage was $3.35. That would mean that $1 back then was a larger chunk of that entire minimum wage than $1 is now. Think about it as a pie chart. So what I've done here is I've created two pie charts, one of which shows, if you think about 1985, the minimum wage was $3.35 per hour. $1, when you compare it to the entire bit of $3.35 per hour, is about a third of the entire hourly pay. But when you look at it in 2015, it's only about a seventh. So that means $1 is a smaller chunk in the idea of currency. You got to remember, the reason I picked a pie chart to look at these two things was because I thought it was important to know the idea of minimum wage is that it's allegedly, or at least ostensibly, a bare minimum with which you can earn a living. So the entire circle should be the base amount with which you can earn a living. In 1985, $1 was a much larger chunk of that base amount than $1 was in 2015. So when you look at the definition of economic inflation and it says a decrease in the purchasing power of a nation's currency, you can see in this pie chart why that is. Because $1 is quote unquote worth less in 2015 than it was in 1985. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. That shows the devaluation. A dollar buys less now than it did then. I mean, heck, you can see it if you go way back to those inflation tables, or not the inflation tables, the minimum wage tables from the previous video. You can see that a dollar was worth 4 hours of work in 1938. So again, we've gotten used to this and that things just cost more now than they used to. But that's a function of inflation. Okay, so what I want to look at now is why. Why does this happen? Why do we have to have inflation? And I don't want to get too lost down this rabbit hole right now. But I did a real quick Google search. Why do we need inflation? And again, this is a rabbit hole because I don't want to get too far down the idea of economics. Economists believe inflation comes about when the supply of money is greater than the demand for money. I honestly, well, okay. So what I'm remembering, when I read that, I remember going to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania when I was very young, like in grade school, and buying some Civil War era replica money at the gift shop there. And the guy at the gift shop who sold it to me told me a story about how during the Civil War, when the Confederacy was beginning to lose, really lose, how inflation jacked up the prices of everything. They started printing more money to put more money in the hands of the South. And unfortunately, then, they also jacked up prices because now there was more money, so people had more money, so everything costed more. But then it cost so much that they had to print more money to cover it. And this is called runaway inflation. I actually have some Zimbabwean dollars with the exact same problem, where inflation begins to outpace the currency that it's based on, so they print more money, which drives up prices. So they print more money, it drives up prices, and it ends up spiraling out of control. Ostensibly, that's what the Federal Reserve is supposed to control. But again, this is now getting down the idea of economics. So I clicked around a little bit and tried to find some other, some other ideas of why inflation is needed. And this was a great little question. What's the deal with inflation? It's bad for individual spending power. It erodes the value of our money. That's maybe a strong word. But the author that responds says, I get the idea behind being against inflation. Why would people want to see prices rise over time? Wouldn't people benefit from lower or stable prices? In theory, this seems rational, but theory rarely works in the real world. Again, this is economic theory. In the real world, the economy operates based on expectations. And, right or wrong, inflation and deflation bring about a very set of expectations. Now, I don't want to go any further down this rabbit hole because we have enough information already to help us understand whether or not minimum wage has kept pace with inflation. And here's what it is. Here's what it is. It's expressed as a percentage. Inflation is expressed as a percentage. That's all we have to know. If we know that, then we understand how to deal with it mathematically. And in the next video, we're going to do that at the board. We're going to see how we can use this percentage to explain inflation and explain on average how it works year to year. For example, I just happen to see this little image of coffee cups right here. The price of a coffee cup, the price of a cup of coffee going up from 25 cents in 1970 to $1.59 in 2019. Notice how it's creeping up. That's inflation, how inflation has changed the price of a cup of coffee over time. We're going to look at the mathematics of what's actually going on in here as a percentage. And that's how it ties back to financial math. Okay, next video, we're at the board.